Now at this point, from a feature point of view, this app is almost done. Sure, the chart is still missing, but we can manage our expenses here. We can add expenses and delete expenses. We can undo such a deletion process if we want to. So that's looking good. And of course, we'll get back to the chart. But before we do that, it's finally time to come back to styling this app and to take a closer look at Flutter's theming mechanism, which you may use for styling your apps. Because of course, whilst this app doesn't look super ugly, it's also not really that appealing visually. And of course, what we could do to make it more appealing is we could style the individual parts manually, just as we did it in other sections in this course. We could, for example, set up a linear gradient for the background of our scaffold widget, as we did it in this quiz app we built earlier in the course. And we could use techniques like this to style this app here, this expense tracker app, if we wanted to. And of course, there's nothing wrong with this approach, but it would also be nice if we had one central place in which we could set up certain styles, and those would then automatically get applied to certain widgets, or could at least easily be referenced from inside our different widgets, so that we, for example, don't have to copy and paste color definitions across different parts of our app. And this can be achieved with Flutter's theming system, which we can set up here in main Dart in our Material App widget. Because this Material App widget, which is this root entry point to our app, so to say, this root widget that contains all our other widgets in the end, this Material App widget is the widget you use for setting up your app's theme. Because I mentioned before that this app widget does a lot of behind the things stuff, but it also gives you some key configuration settings that you can make here that influence your entire app. And the theme is one of those settings. And indeed, at this point here, I already have a theme set up. I got theme data set to use Material 3 to make sure that my app here uses this Material 3 look. Now, this might not be necessary anymore at the point of time you're viewing this video, because Material 3 might be the default by then, but this theme parameter that can be set on this Material app will be useful nonetheless, because setting up a theme is not just about switching between the Material 3 or Material 2 looks. But instead you can use this theming mechanism to control in detail which color different widgets in your app will have, and which colors you want to be able to use in your app, and which text styles you want to be able to use, and so on. So how can you then customize this theme? Customizing your application's theme involves setting this theme parameter here on the Material app, as we're already doing it. And theme wants a theme data object, which can be created with this theme data class provided by Flutter. Now, when instantiating this theme data class, you get many parameters that you can set to fine-tune your app's theme. And this can be super overwhelming, and I will also say that Flutter's theming system, whilst being quite powerful and flexible, also evolved a lot over time, and therefore this theme data class here also allows you to set a lot of parameters which still work but shouldn't be used anymore, because they might be removed in the future and there are better ways of configuring your theme. It's also worth pointing out that if you create a theme data object like this by instantiating theme data, and then passing some configuration between those parentheses, you're actually telling Flutter that you're setting up the entire theme from scratch. Which means that theoretically, you really should configure all these aspects that make up your application. You should configure all text styles you could possibly use. You should configure all other styles that might be used by any widgets in your app. And whilst this of course can make sense for certain apps, it also means a lot of extra work, because you might be happy with some default theme styles that Flutter applies otherwise. Now, of course, you could argue that this app here, by default, doesn't look that horrible. And that is correct, but you'll see a difference if I switch to a different way of setting up my theme, a way which I would actually recommend using. Instead of creating your theme data like this, it's better if you don't pass anything to this constructor here, and you instead call copy with, and then to copy with you pass your settings, like for example in my case here, use material 3 true. If you do that, and you force a reload, at least for me, I always have to force a reload to make these theme settings have an effect on the running app. If you do that, you will see that it now looks slightly different. It looks slightly different. For example, this text in the title here looks different, and I would argue looks a bit better. Because now we're actually preserving some better default styles that are applied by default by Flutter, and we can now override selected styles with that copy with method. So instead of setting up an entire theme from scratch and having to style everything from scratch, we're now using some default themes set up by Flutter, and we're only overriding selected styles or selected aspects of that theme, you could say. For example, we could now also target another parameter here in this copy with method, which we're calling, and set the scaffold background color to any color of our choice. And maybe not red, I'll just use this as a starting point to pick a color, but then we could go for something like this, like a light purplish color. We'll change this later anyways, but we could do that, force those changes to be applied, and now you would see this background. Of course, this doesn't look great yet, but this is how you can now overwrite individual parts of the overall theme. And here you can see that it's now in one central place where I can make certain adjustments, like this scaffold background color. And it will then automatically apply to all the widgets that are interested in that setting. In this case, the scaffold widget. And if I would have an app with multiple screens, so with multiple instances of the scaffold widget, all those screens would use this color. So that's how theming generally works and how you generally, in most cases, want to apply your changes to a theme. Instead of setting up an entire theme from scratch, it's often better to copy an existing theme and then just style individual aspects of that theme.